And we are back with more News Talk Saga 960. Mark Bertrani with you. So very glad you could join us. And listen, this is cool. Andy Lee, who's normally in Calgary doing the work that she does, the journalistic, investigative work that she does, exposing the Trudeau regime, is actually in Mexico City, taking a bit of a break, getting a bit of a breather, but she's still working. And that's why it's so good having Andy on the show, joining us right now. She looks like she's having a grand old time there in Mexico City. You're there on vacation right now, taking a bit of a break, Andy?
Yeah. I want to take it out of the madness that's Canada right now. All the protests going on, and I really wanted to, I've got I've got sort of a desire lately to escape my country sometimes.
Tell me about it.
Well, yeah, you're in Florida, right? So you know what that's like. So fortunately, of course, I've got the right to do so because I've got my 2 vaccines. We don't know how long that's going to last. That's that privilege for people who are only double vaccinated and not boosted. Dr. Tam's been ramping up a lot of the rhetoric about the need for third doses. And potentially I see that being added to the if you want to leave your country, you have to get this done regimen coming up shortly. So I thought I would get out while the getting's good.
Did the mandates, were the mandates proving to be onerous for you? I mean, you got your 2 jabs. That may soon be 3 jabs, I think, if the government has its way. But there is a lot of talk about, ending the mandates, allowing those who are unvaccinated to do things like flying, jumping on an airplane and, or a train or a ferry. And I think it's absolutely outrageous that people have been prevented from doing so while other countries phase out their mandates. Canada is digging in its heels. This regime just seems to have no interest in making life bearable for millions of people who have made a decision not to get the jabs. So I think it's extremely unfair. So kudos to the opposition conservatives, federally speaking, who continue to hammer the government in this regard. But I wanted to ask you about a story that you've been working on regarding Trudeau, regarding the pandemic measures that, among them, include the tracking and tracing of Canadians through the use of their cell phones. You've been doing some terrific work on this. You've been tweeting about it, and so maybe between gulps of delicious-looking white wine, you can tell us a little bit about that story, Andy.
Yeah. So sorry, obviously, I'm in Mexico. I had a couple of margaritas last night. I threw out some tweets about Trudeau. Maybe that I shouldn't have. I got maybe a little bit rowdy there last night. But before that, so I was looking back into and sort of, this use of mobility data has come up to the forefront again. Because it was shown that they were tracking Canadian cell phone mobility data. They were tracking people's trips to the store, liquor stores, grocery stores, gatherings, things like that. And so, I sort of went back, and I'd always meant to look at this company because this company it's a very interesting company. It's backed by a billionaire in Hong Kong named Li Keqiang, and he's got a history with Trudeau. Trudeau has met with him on a couple of occasions, back in 2016, back when we saw him, the meeting with the Premier of China as well, and back when sort of some of these dubious deals were done, in real estate and things like that. We're talking about Anbang, the retirement homes that were sold off. So that was sort of the time period. And so I went back and actually looked because I can remember Trudeau saying that he wasn't going to be using mobility data. And so I went and I pulled back the actual dates. And so he made the announcement on March 24th, 2020. He stated very clearly that the federal government had no immediate plans to use cell phone data to track citizens' movements during the pandemic. And so, that's a very, it's a very straightforward statement, right? We're not going to do it with what he said. But 2 days later, he gave a contract to Blue Dot, which is a company that specializes in cell phone tracking, that specializes in sort of early pandemic warning. It's an interesting company. I'm not saying that it's an evil company. They do good work. They tracked Zika and things like that. So, but I mean, the fact that just 2 days later we gave $500,000 to Blue Dot, and this when this contract was awarded, it wasn't publicly disclosed either. So I had tried to find this before at the time and I couldn't find it, and I had to go back, and so now it's up on the website for public disclosure. But initially, it wasn't publicly disclosed. So it very clearly says that they intended to use mobility data.
Right.
It's right there. So, Trudeau's been caught, and he gets caught lying all the time, right? It's not even scandalous anymore because he just does it all the time. But I was really angry because I thought, March 24th, you're saying that you have no intention of doing this. And obviously this award was tendered out, before you said that. And, it's very clear that your government had every intention of using mobility data to track Canadian citizens' movements during the pandemic. Is it necessarily insidious? No, but we didn't know that you were doing it. You said that you weren't doing it, right? So how would we know that you were doing it? I think it was BlackLocks initially that broke the story about, and so this was the company Blue Dot that actually partnered with TELUS and gave out a cell phone location data, and it's supposed to be anonymous. And that's okay if we're using anonymous cell phone data. But it's sort of a slippery slope thing. Could we get into a situation where down the future, the government could compel these private companies and say, well, we want not anonymous data. We want to know who was at the Ottawa protest so that we could charge them retroactively. So that's sort of, that's the, and you see this sort of stuff happen in China, right? Obviously, tech companies are compelled under national security laws to, give out, data to the government. So, so it's a concerning sort of trajectory. It's even more concerning because they lied about it, right? It's like,
absolutely.
If it's not insidious, then why did you lie about it to begin with? And if you go back through the contract, the first contract, Trudeau actually had a meeting saying that he was going to partner with Blue Dot March 23rd. So that was a day before he made the statement. So, I mean, he was just bald-faced lying.
Yeah, I mean, lying comes as easily as breathing to Justin Trudeau. I mean, we all know that. And here is, have a quick look at the BlackLocks story dating back to February the 9th. This is when members of Parliament suspended the cell data scoop. Commons at the time voted 173 to 155 to order federal regulators to suspend a data scoop on millions of cell phone users. Telecom customers were never properly advised that their tracking data would be compiled by the Public Health Agency, that according to members of Parliament. The quote in the story, Andy, is there was no consent given by users to allow the telecom companies to collect this data. Conservative MP John Broussard, Barrie Innisfil, Ontario, said that to the Commons. Canadians are becoming increasingly concerned about the expansive overreach of the government. And that's another statement by Broussard. The Public Health Agency on December the 17th of last year detailed the scope of its data monitoring in a notice to contractors, operators-based location data and services for public health mobility analysis. Fancy title. The agency said it compiled cell tower tracking data to monitor compliance with lockdown orders. Members of Parliament ordered the practice halted pending ongoing hearings of the Commons Ethics Committee. Quote, we are simply not at the point of understanding how this data was collected, whether it was properly identified, what the risks are with re-identification, and why the Privacy Commissioner was not involved in the process. So here it is, a lot of shady dealings around bringing this in. As you pointed out correctly, there were lies at the highest part of our government around whether it was going to happen to begin with, and then it happened pretty much the next day or shortly thereafter. that Blue Dot was given this contract, and the data was collected, and I'm sure that the data is still very much part in the government data banks, and probably should be considering the circumstances under which it was collected, it should probably be deleted. Now, whether it's going to happen or not, I doubt it. But these guys are clearly using and have been using the pandemic as an excuse to spy on Canadians. And the next step after that, obviously, is to go after people who are behaving in ways that you don't agree with. So we're really going down a very dark road. Andy, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, right? There's a lot of concerns here, especially, what was the sort of initial intention? Was it to identify gatherings that were maybe people defying lockdown orders and, go out and ticket them? And, is that something that we could see, an application in the future again? And, in light of the Ottawa protests and the intelligence gathering in the Ottawa protests, could the government in the future sort of compel these companies to, not use, anonymous data? Could they be compelled in the future to give out names so that, people who were present at events that the government deemed illegal, which there's, question of the legality. A judge, of course, ruled that the protests were not legal. But they said that they were going to go after protesters retroactively. So is this one application, and is this something that the government could choose to use down the road to go and ticket people, that aren't agreeing with their views, the unacceptables in the future? Absolutely, it's a concern, right? It's done in other countries. So, and like I said, it's not, you can't sort of see demons in every corner, right? There's also there's big benefits to collecting mobility data and things like that. And is it useful to prevent maybe future outbreaks? Yeah, but you have to be really, really careful. And I think that given this government, this cabinet's tendency towards secrecy, that's the most concerning aspect of this. And as well, like the RCMP just got put on the spot. So I've been watching the artificial intelligence committees. So they used an AI software called Clearview. And they lied and said that they were not using this facial recognition software when they were indeed using it. And they got caught using it. And so, again, it's just sort of like, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Facial recognition can have a lot of benefits to being used, right? When you're looking for maybe a child, like a sex trafficker or something like that, right? Or somebody who's sort of dealing with child pornography, things like that. There's really good applications for this, but it's just sort of like when we're not being honest in our regulatory bodies and our law enforcement are not being honest about how they're using this technology, then it becomes really, really concerning because they're not being upfront with us. So the other weird thing about this Blue Dot company is, there was initially back in October 2019, there were reports because the World Military Games were held in Wuhan. And, there was some weird reports that came out at the time saying that Wuhan was very quiet. There's images of this is a city of millions and millions of people. It should be bustling. If you've ever been to China, there's very few areas in China that aren't bustling before the pandemic. So, the streets were empty. Some of them were fenced off. Reports were that it was very, very quiet. And then soldiers said that they got sick. And this was in October 2019. So the question was, was COVID in Wuhan and was it already sort of being, widely, did the Chinese government know in 2019 in October, potentially that they had sort of a new respiratory virus on their hands? And so the company that Canada signed the contract with, Blue Dot, to track the pandemic, they actually signed their first ever contract with the Public Health Agency of Canada in November 2019. So that is a month before knowledge of the pandemic was sort of widespread and it was widely accepted that, yes, there was definitely something going on in China. There was maybe a new SARS-like disease that was going around. So that really wasn't commonplace knowledge until December 2019. So the timeline of events is really funny when you look at October 2019, we maybe had people getting sick already. And then all of a sudden the government signs a contract with a mobility company that specializes in tracking pandemics in November 2019, which is a month.
Like they knew something was coming.
Well, I think it definitely raises a question.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think
considering how unprepared they were as far as the PPE is concerned, it's really strange. In some areas they seem to have gotten, they were well prepared when it comes to spying on people, but when it comes to preparing and having PPE, they were woefully ill prepared and made many mistakes. We know about that. Andy Lee joining us on Saga 960. She's coming to us from Mexico City. Beautiful view behind you there, as I can see. Looks like you're.
It's gorgeous here.
Yeah, I mean, how hot is it in Mexico City? I guess some people would be wondering
32
about it.
Today. It was about 32. So yeah, it's just, it's incredible when you look at the food prices in Canada. I was just stunned today when I'm paying like 20 pesos, which is basically nothing.
Wow.
Right? It's basically like nothing for a meal today. And I'm eating tacos for, 50 cents each that I couldn't get probably for $6 or $7 in Canada. It was really eye-opening how far your money goes when you're out of North America. Really, 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 really stunning to, see that sort of that contrast when you look at people who are really struggling. I know I'm looking at my grocery shopping very, very carefully now. Whenever I go out, so I'm always thinking, can I afford this? Can I afford this meat? Right? My kids love bacon. Can I afford bacon? Should I be, how am I? So I think a lot of Canadians are questioning, and realizing that the money isn't going very far anymore. So yeah, nice to get out in the world and see places, where your money can still sort of, take you places and get you good food and things like that. And like in Canada, where, I don't think I could get a drop of gas in Canada for 20 pesos right now. So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to be watching this Blue Dot stuff. I think this is going to probably be coming up in the House of Commons more. And like I said, just looking at the timeline of the contracts, I think it really does raise a concern of who knew what when.
Yeah.
What are the odds we signed a contract a month before there was a pandemic with a company that specializes in detecting pandemics? What are the odds? Were we just super ahead of the curve? Or, were all those rumors about the 2019 World Military Games, did our government acknowledge that and say, yeah, maybe there's something is going on? And so I'd like to see those questions asked in question period to find out exactly what they knew and why they started signing up with this company to begin with. I think it's a very, very good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Just pile it on, because this prime minister has been the focus of many ethical questions, breaches, and of course, some things that were even worse than just ethical breaches, that we saw that he probably should have faced charges over the SNC Lavalin scandal, obstruction of justice. We know from leaked emails and documents that have come out that he was potentially going to be charged with fraud over the Aga Khan, over accepting that trip. But among other reasons, the RCMP felt that it was, what wasn't in the public interest to charge him. So here's the RCMP, the National Police Force, making the decision that high-ranking officials like Trudeau, politicians, should not be charged because it's not in the public interest to do so. What a terrible decision that was, and what a message it sends to politicians who now, I guess, think that they are above the law. And that's what this prime minister thinks, that he is above the law.
Well, I always said he got very lucky with that one, right?
Yeah, funny that. If it was you or I mean, you had your accounts frozen. You weren't even part of the convoy. except covering it as an independent journalist. And yet you were among those that had their accounts frozen. I think we're obviously in the midst of a review. Do you think that you might have an opportunity to weigh in on what was done and why it was done and how unfair and arbitrary the decision was to go after people's accounts with the banks, in full cooperation? I mean, what an outrageous thing to happen in a country that's supposedly free.
No, I mean, it's a possibility. I've talked to the MPs. I just said, it seems like most of, the intel that was used to enact the Emergencies Act came from CBC stories. So, I sort of was angry last night. Like I said, I had a couple of margaritas and I was a little bit ticked off. I was like, well, how come, the CBC gets to weigh in and their stories are used, but nobody's looking at maybe Rupa or, or Greg Reeve from Fox News, or the stuff that I was putting out, which of course was seized and banned. How come none of the independents, Andrew Lawton, who was there and got pepper sprayed, right? Alexandra Lois, who of course got shot with, a tear gas canister, right? And you're like, yeah. I saw her right after that too, bless her heart, I gave her a big hug. So, it's sort of like, how come we only used, how come only sort of that one side of media is being taken as a resource, and you're not looking at all the people, Jonathan Kay and I debunked arson. How come we're not being asked about, our role and our opinion, and how come, what we've done was not used before committee? How come only CBC's stuff gets to be used before committee when they had to retract several articles and several claims? And to my knowledge, none of the independents retract any of our stuff, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if any of that comes up, especially in the independent judicial review, of course, which is being conducted under, with a formal Liberal donor and a formal Liberal lawyer.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that.
I don't think that's what Perrin Beatty, who was the
author
text of the Emergency Act, I don't think that that's what he had in mind when he said that there should be an independent review, sort of done outside of Parliament. The very fact that he went before committee and said that, he said that it was so important, and he said, sorry, it's not a direct quote, but the essence of it was that it was very important to find out if the government invoked this act based on fallacious information, so false information. So the very fact that he would actually go up in front of committee and even make that statement is extremely troubling. It means that obviously there's something in his mind that says, yes, maybe this was invoked under false pretenses.
I want to ask you about something that came up today. There was a posting of a video. This is a member of the European Parliament, Christine Anderson.
Yeah.
You'll recall that she was the one who ripped Justin Trudeau a new one when he showed up to speak, and she called him a dictator, and actually applauded the work of what the convoy members had done. Well, she just came out and shot this video and released it. Now she's speaking German in it, but she in it is warning that the World Health Organization pandemic treaty aims to give the World Health Organization de facto governing power over its member states. Well, I mean, all the countries, what is it, 190 countries or whatever it is, in the event of a pandemic without involvement or consultation with national governments or national parliaments. So this is an unelected body, the World Health Organization, that could have far-reaching powers. And this is a stark warning by her. I'm going to roll this video, even though it's in German, and I will read for those who don't speak the language.
This is almost like a whole segment in and of itself. I've looked into this.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've got a few minutes left. Let's listen.
Liebe Bürger, vor kurzem hatte ich Sie darüber informiert, dass seit dem 1. März eine zwischenstaatliche Verhandlungsgruppe
All right, so she says that an intergovernmental negotiation group
getreten ist, die einen
set a
Zeitplan und eine
timetable
Arbeitsweise zur
for
Neugestaltung der Verträge
reshaping
zwischen
contracts
WHO
between the WHO and
und
member states.
Mitgliedstaaten erarbeitet. Diese
The treaty
Vertragsänderungen zielen darauf
changes
ab, der WHO im
aim,
Falle einer
in the event
Pandemie
of a
die faktische
pandemic, de
Regierungsgewalt
facto
über
government authority
Mitgliedstaaten zu
over
übernehmen,
member states.
ohne
De facto government authority over anybody who's in the World Health Organization without involving or
Einbindung oder
consulting national
Rücksprache mit
governments
nationalen Regierungen
or
oder
national
nationalen
parliaments.
Parlamenten. Meine Damen
Ladies
und
and
Herren,
gentlemen, she says,
damit
this
ist die
means the rule
Volksherrschaft,
of
das
the people, the
Grundprinzip
basic
einer
principle of any
jeden
democracy,
Demokratie endgültig
has
ad
been
acta
finally
gelegt.
laid to rest.
Die
The
Zusammensetzung der
composition of
WHO
the WHO
erfolgt nicht
is
aufgrund
not
von
based on
demokratischen
democratic
Wahlen.
elections. In fact, basically it's run by China. So obviously, if the WHO is a puppet of the Chinese, and the WHO, then the World Health Organization now has this de facto power over governments and parliaments, then this is absolutely outrageous. Essentially puts the world under all the member states under the thumb of the Chinese, which control the World Health Organization. Let's listen a little bit more to what she says.
Die dort sitzenden Entscheidungsträger sind Ihnen gegenüber dann zwar weisungsbefugt, nicht aber Ihnen gegenüber rechenschaftspflichtig und können von Ihnen auch nicht zur politischen Verantwortung gezogen werden. Sie als Bürger haben dann noch nicht einmal mehr politischen Einfluss darauf, wem Sie die Verwaltung der Grundrechte in letzter Zeit.
This is scary stuff. This is absolutely outrageous. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I almost feel like we should do an entire segment on it because there's so much going on here. And I've looked, into this treaty in depth. I found the consulting companies who are doing the consulting on it. Looked at some of the stimulations, and yeah, of course, there's a lot of overlap between China and the WHO. There's a lot of influence that's going on there, and we can sort of, if you want, like I said, I don't want to get totally into it because it'll take us forever. There's a lot of overlap between characters in the WHO and China. There's a lot of influence from the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates as well. So, again, it's one of those things where it's like, if the WHO and the pandemic treaty, it could be a good thing in that you could get the COVAX program. So the COVAX program arguably was something good that came out from people who, collaborated. And undoubtedly, we got vaccines to a lot of people who might not have got them otherwise. And so that was a very good thing. And that was something that the Gates Foundation funded. There was an initiative that they did. But again, it's also one of those slippery slopes in that the WHO obviously made desperate missteps. They weren't sort of given access to investigate, the origins of the virus. They didn't get a lot of access. They didn't get a lot of answers, and they weren't asking a lot of questions early on. So they give some bad advice too. And they flip-flopped a lot. And so it's like, well, in the future, do we want the WHO telling us that we have to lock down or else, right? And as well, they wouldn't let Bruce testify. So Canadian MPs voted in the House of Commons. They wanted Bruce to testify in front of their health committee and answer some questions. And the WHO forbid him from testifying in front of Canadian MPs. So to me, that's a huge red flag right there, in that if we sign on to this, do we get any say? Do we get accountability? Because we didn't see it during this pandemic. So why should we expect it during future pandemics, right? So I think it's very appropriate to raise alarms. And Leslyn Lewis has been doing a lot of that.
She has.
Yeah, we should almost do an episode and just unpack that whole thing. We can go through Press Progress, what they wrote about her. Press Progress, has got some pretty funny funding on its side as well. So I sort of, followed that money and looked into that publication that went after Leslyn Lewis. Andrew Coyne went after her, saying she was a nut. And I was like, actually, you can look up. I mean, all you have to do is follow the trail. It's all right here. There is an initiative. It is mostly funded by Bill Gates. This is the consultants. These are what they're recommending. It's in the future, but it's worth thinking about right now, right?
Yeah. It's not that far in the future. My understanding is that it comes into effect like later this month. That's what I had heard.
Well, I think the meetings are good. We should start seeing drafts coming out. Of course, our government, we know Justin Trudeau, right? He'll blindly sign on in a second. He probably won't even read the thing. he'll just be like, yeah, whatever.
Look, he doesn't believe in nation states. We already know that.
Yeah, I mean, we're
he's described us as Canada.
We have core identity, so we might as well sign it off.
Who trusts him? Nobody. Well, that I know of. I mean, honestly.
Sure, yeah. So, let's plan to do an episode, and if we want to, we can actually really, really unpack all of that and look at what's behind it. And we'll look at James.
Yeah.
I think that tweet you put up was from James Melville. So we do quite a little bit of twittering back and forth. One of us is expecting to get sort of bombed any day now.
We do have a couple of minutes. Let's listen a little bit. As long as you brought up Leslyn, what she said about this. This, I guess, is what triggered some of the pundits at the Globe, I think.
We do not need the WHO to limit our healthcare sovereignty. We need to create our own pandemic strategy where our government is accountable to us. Canada is a sovereign nation. It should maintain control of its healthcare system, including its pandemic response and planning. We need to increase the capacity of hospitals to deal with the pandemic. We need to make sure that we have pandemic funding that will relieve some of the burden that was put on the healthcare system. When we look at lockdowns are an indication of a broken healthcare system. We need to make sure that we create beds, that we can better respond to pandemics. And we do not need an international organization like the WHO to tell us how to do that.
Especially if the WHO is run by China. Anyway, I mean, honestly, she's absolutely right on that.
It's just, you saw China, and I mean, this is what my friend author who was banned from Twitter, Michael Sanger, we go back and forth quite a bit, but he wrote about how China started initiating lockdowns, and there was really no precedent, and you very quickly saw the WHO, and we can go, let's do this in like a big episode, we'll rip this whole thing apart. But
all right, let's do that. Let's wrap it up right now. But can you come back maybe like tomorrow or the next day? Come back soon. We can do a more fulsome episode since you've done a lot of research into this, okay? Because we really got to get to the bottom of exactly what these people are signing on to. Any idea that we're going to be relinquishing our the sovereignty of any of our, well, whether it's Canada or any other country, to the World Health Organization, which is a puppet of the Chinese, is absolutely outrageous and absolutely must be opposed at every step of the way. Thank you once again for coming on the show, Andy.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll see if I'm in any shape tomorrow. I don't know. We're gonna go out to Mexico City, but tomorrow, then the next day. Yeah. And this is something that really deserves a good proper unpacking.
Yeah, and we're gonna give it that. Thank you so much. And I know you've whatever research you can prepare for us, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Have a great time.
You antisocial yobs in Canada. And, God bless you. I'm going to keep on fighting for your rights. And hopefully, you'll be able to get out of your country soon, right? So,
absolutely.
And I don't know. If it comes down to a third booster, I'm on the fence about that. So I might be just...
I'm not.
You're not?
Right.
You're not getting it? No?
I have no intention whatsoever. I ain't getting near that. Thank you so much, Andy. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Andy Lee, coming to us from Mexico City. I've got to take a quick commercial break. Back with more on Newstalk Saga 960 and the Mark Petronis Show after this.